Welcome back. In the last chapter, we covered why Europe protects data. Now let's meet the who and the what, the institutions that make the rules and the laws they've produced. Here's what's ahead in this chapter. First, we'll clear up one of the most common exam traps, the difference between the Council of Europe and the European Union, and between the Court of Human Rights in Strasbourg and the Court of Justice in Luxembourg. Trust me, mixing these up costs marks every year. Then, we'll walk through the legislative timeline, Convention 108 and its key principles, the Data Protection Directive of 95 and why it fell short, and the ePrivacy and e-commerce directives that govern online communications. From there, we arrive at the star of the show, the GDPR itself, its structure, and its risk-based approach. Finally, we'll zoom out to the wider digital rulebook, the NIS and NIS2 cybersecurity directives, and the EU AI Act, because modern privacy professionals never work with the GDPR in isolation. Think of this chapter as learning the org chart and the rulebook of European privacy before you start playing the game. By the end, you'll know exactly who does what and which law applies where. Let's dive in. Let me start with a confession. When I began my privacy career, I confused the Council of Europe with the European Council for months. So let's untangle this once and for all, because the exam absolutely tests it. The Council of Europe is not an EU institution. It's a completely separate international organization, founded in 1949 with 46 member states, far more than the EU's 27. Its mission is human rights, democracy, and the rule of law. Think of it as Europe's human rights guardian. This is the body that gave us the European Convention on Human Rights and, as we learned, Convention 108, the first binding data protection treaty. Now, who enforces the Convention on Human Rights? That's the European Court of Human Rights sitting in Strasbourg. If a person believes a member state violated their Article 8 right to private life, say through unlawful surveillance or excessive workplace monitoring, they can ultimately bring a case there. The court's rulings bind the states involved, and its case law on monitoring and surveillance shapes privacy standards across the continent. Here's a simple memory trick I give all my students. Strasbourg equals human rights. Luxembourg equals EU law. When you see a workplace monitoring case like Barbulescu, think Strasbourg. When you see Google Spain or Schrems, think Luxembourg. We'll meet Luxembourg's court shortly, but first, let's look at the EU's political engine room. Now we cross over into the European Union proper, and I want you to picture how a law like the GDPR actually gets made. Every EU law starts with the European Commission. Think of the Commission as the EU's executive branch and its idea factory rolled into one. It has the exclusive right to propose new legislation. No proposal from the Commission, no law. It was the Commission that drafted the GDPR back in 2012. But its role doesn't end there, and this part matters hugely for your exam. The Commission also issues adequacy decisions, declaring that a country outside the EU protects data well enough for free transfers. And it publishes the standard contractual clauses that companies worldwide paste into their vendor agreements. When your company signs SCCs with a cloud provider, you're using a Commission document. On the other side sits the European Parliament, the only EU institution directly elected by citizens. Parliament debates, amends, and votes on proposals. During the GDPR negotiations, Parliament received thousands of amendments, one of the most lobbied laws in EU history, which tells you how high the stakes were. Here's a simple analogy. The Commission is the chef proposing the menu, and Parliament is one of the two tables that must approve every dish. Who's at the other table? Let's meet them next. Let's complete the picture with two more institutions, and one of them will follow us through this entire course. First, a quick clarification that trips up so many candidates. The European Council consists of the heads of state and government, presidents and prime ministers. They meet at summits to set the EU's broad political direction, but they don't pass laws day to day. The Council of the European Union sometimes called the Council of Ministers, is different. It's where national ministers gather and it co-adopts legislation together with Parliament. So the GDPR needed approval from both Parliament and this Council of Ministers. Three similar names, three different bodies. Take a second to let that settle. Now for the institution you'll hear about constantly, the Court of Justice of the European Union, based in Luxembourg. The CJEU interprets EU law and ensures it applies uniformly across all member states. Why should you care so much? Because in data protection, the CJEU hasn't just interpreted the rules, it has repeatedly rewritten the landscape. It created the right to be forgotten in Google Spain. It demolished two entire EU to US transfer frameworks in the Schrems cases. One court, one ruling, and thousands of companies had to redo their compliance overnight. Remember this, when the CJEU speaks, the privacy world listens. We'll see its judgments again and again throughout this course. We touched on Convention 108 in our history chapter, but now let's open it up and look at what it actually requires, because its principles are the DNA that later laws inherited. Convention 108 applies to automated processing of personal data in both the public and private sectors. That was groundbreaking for 1981. It didn't just regulate governments, it regulated businesses too. So what does it demand? Data must be obtained and processed fairly and lawfully. It must be stored for specified, legitimate purposes and not used in ways incompatible with those purposes. It must be adequate, relevant, and not excessive, accurate, and kept no longer than required. Sound familiar? You've essentially just heard a first draft of GDPR Article 5. The convention also singled out sensitive data, information revealing racial origin, political opinions, religious beliefs, health, or criminal convictions, saying it deserves extra safeguards. And it gave individuals rights to know their data is held, to access it, and to have errors corrected. In 1981, those were revolutionary ideas. Here's how I explain its significance to clients. Convention 108 is like the grandparent whose features you can still see in every family photo. The Directive of 95, the GDPR, even privacy laws in countries far beyond Europe all carry its resemblance. For the exam, remember it as the first binding treaty and the source of the core principles. Now let's meet its most famous descendant's predecessor. Let's talk about the law that governed European privacy for over 2 decades, Directive 95/46/EC, and more importantly, why it eventually had to go. Adopted in 1995, the directive was the EU's first comprehensive data protection instrument. It gave us vocabulary we still use daily: controller, processor, sensitive data, supervisory authority. All of these were defined here. It required every member state to establish an independent data protection authority and gave individuals rights of access and correction. For its time, genuinely impressive. But here's the structural flaw. A directive doesn't apply directly. Each member state must transpose it into national law, and each did so differently. Germany went strict, others went lighter. Registration requirements varied wildly. I remember a colleague describing a pan-European project in the 2000s where the same marketing database needed different legal treatment in every single country. 28 countries, 28 flavors of the same law. So much for harmonization. And think about the timing. 1995, no Google, no Facebook, no smartphones, no cloud computing. The directive was drafted for a world of filing cabinets and early databases, then asked to govern social media and global data flows. Add weak enforcement powers with fines that barely registered on corporate radars, and change became inevitable. So Europe asked, what if we replace the directive with a regulation, one law, applied identically everywhere with real teeth? Hold that thought, because that's the GDPR, coming up in 2 slides. Before we get to the GDPR, we need to meet 2 specialist laws from the early 2000s, because one of them affects every single website you've ever visited. The ePrivacy Directive of 2002 protects the confidentiality of electronic communications, your calls, emails, messages, and the metadata around them. And in 2009, it was amended to add something you experience daily, the cookie rule. Ever wondered why every website greets you with a consent banner? That's the ePrivacy Directive at work. Storing or accessing information on someone's device requires their informed consent, unless it's strictly necessary for the service. It also governs electronic marketing, which is why unsolicited spam emails are illegal in Europe. Now, here's a concept the exam loves: lex specialis. It's a Latin phrase meaning the specific law overrides the general one. Where the ePrivacy Directive has specific rules, say on cookies or marketing emails, those rules take precedence over the GDPR. The two laws work together. ePrivacy handles the specific channel, GDPR handles the personal data behind it. The E-commerce Directive of 2000 plays a supporting role, setting transparency duties and liability rules for online service providers, like when a platform is responsible for hosted content. One last thing, a proposed e-privacy regulation to modernize all this has been stuck in negotiations for years. For now, the directive soldiers on. Now, finally, the main event. Here it is. The General Data Protection Regulation, the law this entire certification revolves around. Let's get properly introduced. The GDPR is Regulation 2016/679, adopted in April 2016 and applicable since the 25th of May 2018. Notice the word regulation. Unlike the old directive, it applies directly and identically in every member state. No national transposition, no 28 flavors. One law for the whole EU. That alone solved the biggest problem of the previous era. Structurally, the GDPR contains 99 articles organized into chapters covering principles, rights of the data subject, obligations of controllers and processors, international transfers, supervisory authorities, and remedies and penalties. Alongside them sit 173 recitals, explanatory notes that judges and regulators use to interpret the articles. When an article seems ambiguous, the recitals often hold the answer. Its twin goals deserve attention: protect fundamental rights and freedoms, and enable the free movement of personal data within the Union. Protection and flow, together. It was never meant to stop data use, only to civilize it. And here's the philosophy that runs through everything: the risk-based approach. The GDPR doesn't treat a village bakery's mailing list like a hospital's genetic database. Obligations scale with risk. Higher risk means stronger measures, impact assessments, maybe a data protection officer. And crucially, you must not only comply, but be able to prove you comply. That's accountability, and we'll dedicate a whole chapter to it. Let's finish this chapter by zooming out, because the GDPR no longer works alone. Europe has built an entire digital rulebook around it, and the exam expects you to know the neighbors. First, cybersecurity. The NIS Directive of 2016 was the EU's first law requiring operators of essential services, think energy, transport, banking, healthcare, to secure their networks and report serious incidents. Its successor, NIS2, adopted in 2022, goes much further. Broader coverage, including cloud providers and digital infrastructure, stricter incident reporting timelines, and personal accountability for management. Here's the connection to our world. When a hospital secures patient records, GDPR Article 32 and NIS2 obligations overlap and reinforce each other. Security law and privacy law are converging, and professionals who understand both are in demand. Then there's the newest arrival, the EU Artificial Intelligence Act, the world's first comprehensive AI law. It takes a risk-tiered approach. Some AI practices are banned outright, like social scoring. High-risk systems, say AI screening job applications, face strict obligations around data governance, transparency, and human oversight. Where does privacy fit? Everywhere. AI systems train on personal data, profile people, and automate decisions. So the AI Act and the GDPR often govern the same system simultaneously. We'll explore that intersection in our final chapter. For now, remember the big picture. GDPR is the center of a growing regulatory universe. See you at the checkpoint. Excellent. 2 chapters down, and you've already built something most candidates never bother with: a mental map of the institutions and laws that everything else plugs into. From here on, whenever I mention the Commission, the CJEU, or the ePrivacy rules, you'll know exactly who and what I mean. Quick pause before we move on. If this teaching style is working for you, do hit the subscribe button. It unlocks this full playlist plus all our other certification playlists, and it genuinely helps the channel keep producing free, structured training like this. My second request: stay with the sequence. The next chapter begins the real legal core: what counts as personal data. Everything we've built so far was preparation for that conversation, so don't skip ahead. And if you want to take your preparation to the next level, our complete CIPP/E course on Udemy is waiting for you. It includes everything here, plus chapter quizzes to test yourself, full-length practice exams that mirror the real test, role-play scenarios, and downloadable toolkits. If you learn best with structure and self-assessment, that's your path. Link in the description. That's a wrap on institutions and frameworks. Next stop, Chapter 3, where we answer the deceptively simple question: what exactly is personal data? The answer is broader than you think. See you there.